What's up, YouTube? We're back with another class breakdown. This one is for the Fire Prophet. Let's get into it. The Fire Prophet is a incantation class that uses Faith. Faith is the only scaling attribute for their spells, and they deal fire damage. They are, I would say, a pretty good class. They're one of the more quote-unquote vanilla styles of play, similar to the way that Glint Sorcerer was really based heavily on a vanilla style, in that there was like a lot of spell support for Flame Prophet or Giant's Flame spells in the base game. Now, one kind of oddity to the base game, the way they set it up, was that there was two sort of types of normal fire. There was Flame, and then there was Giant's Flame. So Flame is the more like slightly more orange-yellow color, whereas the Giant's Flame is more red. And so we've kind of grouped those together into one thing just so that they'd be like nice and consistent, and they'd be like, you know, synergizing with each other and working well together. Their playstyle is sort of short to medium range with some long range potential, and they do pretty high damage. They have a new status effect that we apply called Immolation, which is basically a slow burning over time that can stack with itself, that also scales with your Faith stat. They also have really good AoE. They have AoE damage on most of their attacks, either through penetration or through explosions and so on. All right, let's get into the spells. First one up is Flame Whirl. Flame Whirl has been buffed from vanilla. It used to be called Whirl O Flame. We've definitely changed a lot of the names of some of the spells because we felt they were a little bit too flowery. Then, you know, we made them a little more straightforward. So Flame Whirl's been buffed in terms of damage, but also range. It goes much further than it did in vanilla. So if I cast it here, this guy's pretty far away. And so, yeah, it doesn't quite hit him. But if I full charge... There we go. So the full charge definitely has, and it went further than him even. And the damage on that's pretty high considering. So because it's kind of slow to cast and because the range is not fantastic, we went ahead and gave it very strong damage to sort of compensate for that, to make it more attractive to actually be used. A new spell coming up in the next upcoming patch, which is 1.4, is called Flaming Armament. And it's basically, it's sort of like a fire grease, but it's a spell. This was sort of missing from their toolkit before, and we felt that adding it would add a lot. It's just a normal damage buff that inflicts immolation when you hit stuff. Up next, we have Giant's Flame's Protection. This is a spell that is kind of similar to Black Flame's Protection, which no longer exists in the mod, and instead we've now made it fire. Defensive enchantment creates fire within that increases fire and physical damage absorption by 30% and other absorption by 10%, lasts for 90 seconds. So it's very good now. Like, it buffs your defense by a pretty huge margin. It lasts for a pretty long time, and there's nothing it doesn't defend against now. It just has an emphasis on physical and fire. Up next, we have Purging Flames. So Purging Flames is similar to Flame Cleanse Me from vanilla. It's almost the same, with a few subtle differences. Purging Flames creates fire within that burns away toxins, instantly removing rot, poison, deathblight, frostbite, and makes the caster immune to those effects for 10 seconds. So just an improved version. Also, it doesn't damage you. It shouldn't damage you. It still might, actually. Let me see. Okay, so yeah, it does damage you a very slight amount still. But now you get immunity for 10 seconds, so it's generally going to be worth the health you spend. Okay, Flame Surge. So this is another one that's from vanilla that used to be called Surge O Flame that we have buffed. We haven't buffed the range. We've simply buffed the damage on this. So you've got Catch Flame. And Catch Flame is one of those spells that it does good damage. It does probably too much damage. And so what we wanted to do was to make Flame Surge slightly more attractive, with the realization that Flame Surge is not as good as Catch Flame. The biggest reason is that Catch Flame, you can cast it quickly, often instantly. You can have roll attacks off of it, making it even quicker. And the damage it inflicts per hit is quite high. Whereas Surge is kind of slow, clunky, and you're kind of locked into this animation for a little while. So we figured that if you're compromising your defense, you're compromising your ability to really like react well. We wanted the damage to really be worth that cost, also considering that it's very close range. So it does actually slightly more DPS than spamming Catch Flame. Now, granted, we have lowered the damage of Catch Flame in the mod compared to vanilla. So Catch Flame is not quite as good as it used to be, but Surge is better than that in terms of just raw DPS. So there's definitely some cases where you'd rather be using Surge over Catch Flame, and that was sort of the goal. So since I just talked a lot about it, we can just talk about Catch Flame. Catch Flame, so there's sort of two spells now that do the same thing. There's Catch Flame and Greatflam. Catch Flame being the smaller version, you start out with it, and then Greatflam. So Greatflam is just the bigger version, but they look the same. They act the same. So Greatflam used to be very slow. It was kind of a strange spell in vanilla because it was just the same thing as Catch Flame but bigger, but then the cast time was really slow for no reason. And it didn't have the running attack, it didn't have the jumping attack, and it didn't have the crouching attack. But as you can see in the mod, it has all of those, right? So now it works the exact same as Catch Flame, kind of like it should. It just does more damage. It's just an upgraded version of it. So the way they had it configured in vanilla was like Catch Flame was insanely powerful and Greatflam was essentially useless, just completely useless. And so we've made them comparable, like much better compared to each other. Up next, we have Fire's Deadly Sin. So this is incredibly buffed from vanilla. It works the exact same, right, in the way that it looks and everything. You create an explosion, the fire burns around you, and then you're on fire for a little while. The big difference, though, is that it doesn't damage you anymore. So it's basically all upside. The full charge version basically will do more damage on the explosion, and the self-burn will last longer. Charging Enhancing Potency is basically talking about the explosion will do more damage when you charge it. I mean, overall, that cast animation, this one, where you put your hands out and put them on the ground, that has been accelerated quite a bit in the mod. So those type of spells that use this animation are all going to be faster because of it. But yeah, so this spell is so cool, and one of the reasons why it's cool is that it incentivizes hybrid style play rather than just pure caster, because you want to be up close. But the truth is that this class could actually be up close as a pure caster because of the presence of things like Greatflame. So you could go Fire's Deadly Sin plus Greatflame and never actually have to use a weapon per se. You could just use the seal. So Flame Scatter. This one, we really did not edit too much from vanilla. It's the same. The only thing that's different is that it has greater damage. There is one thing I'd kind of like to see change with the spell, which is its range. I think that... So the full charge version has pretty decent range, as you can see. When you full charge, you can actually toss this thing for a decent amount of AoE. But I think overall, both the non-charged and full charge could have extended range. And also, I believe that another thing that would make the spell more attractive is if in the full charged version, if it had more projectiles in the full charge version, so as to create an even better AoE spread. Generally, I find that AoE spells that are kind of non-specific like this don't have a tremendous amount of use. And the reason why is that you'd rather use something that's more targeted and more reliable to kill one particular thing. Oftentimes, even when you're fighting large groups, that's true. Because you often just want to kill one thing at a time when you're killing large groups to make sure it's like, I kill him and then I kill him, rather than throw something that just does a little bit of damage to everything, which feels like, well, why am I doing that? They're all still alive, right? That's not necessarily, and I missed some, so it's not even that efficient. I just often find that if you're going to go AoE with spells, they need to be really good at it. Otherwise, they're kind of not worth the effort. And I do still kind of feel that way about this spell, and I think that it's one that I could see improving for patch 1.4. Okay, so up next, Flame of the Fell God. So this has been tremendously improved from base game. It was one that was just trying to be decent, but never quite succeeding in base game, in my opinion. So the way that it works now is that the range of the orb that floats forward is much further. It can actually, and also the tracking of that orb is much better. And the delay between when the orb is about to explode and it exploding is much shorter as well, so as to more likely hit things. And the damage has been increased. The way that I think about this spell is that it's essentially doing what Glint Sorcery's full moon spells do. They're good for pre-casting before the fight begins. You get it out there, you get the orb out there, and then you start shooting your normal spells at them, and then as they close distance, they get exploded on by the orb. And for that, it's insanely good. In fact, there are some bosses, I was surprised how good this spell is. Like Melania, I was shocked at how good Flame of the Fell God is against Melania. It creates this nice burst. Like, this is a theme with this class, is you see a lot of burst damage. You see damage all kind of hitting at once, going boom, 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 similar to the way that, like, Underworld Mage works, except with fire. Also, more damage, I would say, direct damage than something like Underworld Mage, which Underworld Mage relies a lot on Frostbite in order for its damage to be good enough. So up next, we have Greatflam Sling, once again renamed, but the same as vanilla. Not much has been done to this one, just some slight damage tweaks to get it in balance with the mod. Other than that, pretty much the same. Great spell, kind of bread and butter, big fireball. Okay, up next we have changed Fire Buff from vanilla, changed the name to Stoke the Flames, and we have put it later in the progression, so you can't just run and grab it early. And it's a little different now. The way that it works is offensive enchantment creates an invigorating fire within that increases all fire damage you deal by 10%, reduces the stamina cost of attacks by 20%, and reduces the cost of incantations by 20%. Lasts for 3 minutes. All fire damage you deal by 10% is a lot. It's an extremely good buff. Reduces stamina cost of attacks, and that includes spells, stamina cost of spells, and reduces the cost of incantations. Yeah, this is just kind of crazy good. It's just really, really good. It's such a staple of vanilla that we wanted it to be a mainstay of the class, and so we went ahead and we just laid it on thick for this class, for this buff. Whether you're a caster, whether you're melee, or whether you're hybrid, you want this. Right, that was sort of the idea, is that this is definitely a cornerstone of the playstyle. Okay, next batch of spells. Strange. Okay, so we've changed the spell that you get from the Fire Giant. We call that Flame Pillars now, and it's on one of the tomes. Same animation as Fire's Deadly Sin. It's faster, and so more useful. The other thing we've done is we've made the pillars much, much, much more contained closer to the player. Also, they erupt faster, and the general damage of them is much more normalized, right? So it's not so disparate between how much damage you could get out of it. You're going to get a more consistent amount. But because it's faster, it's easier to actually find windows to use this, and on large enemies, you still would want to. And the biggest difference between the regular and full charge version is that the full charge version will increase the density of flame pillars, not the wideness of the spread. Because we felt that the bigger the widening of the spread, the sort of more difficult it was to use with any sort of reliability. When you use it now, you know that it's going to erupt near you, so it has a tremendous amount of reliability. And so you can always feel confident when you're doing it that you're going to hit the thing if you're next to the thing, whatever the thing may be. The damage on it's pretty good. Let's take a look here. Yeah. So you could imagine something getting hit by multiples of those pillars and it being very, very effective. Okay, one of my favorite new spells, Flame Strike. Flame Strike is essentially the same style of spell as Honed Bolt or Rock Burst, except it's fire, and it's a late game spell, so it does a tremendous amount of damage. It also throws the opponent up into the air. It's one of these spells that once you've gotten started casting it, you can spam it, right? And so that kind of means that there are some bosses even that will just die to this spell because you could just sit there and spam it on them until they're dead if they have like a long wind-up animation of some kind. So it's really an exploitable spell in that sense, where if you have a window from a decent distance, you could spam it on something. There are some bosses, like I said, that it just absolutely destroys. Very satisfying spell because of the size of the explosion. I love it. I think that spell is really fun. Up next, you get your first incredibly long-range option, which is Fell Missile. It is the fireball that the giant shoots out of his hand. It's very, very long range, but it actually does slightly less damage than Greatflam Sling. So the damage is not the highest in the world, but you're basically trading off damage for range. So you're getting like a lot of range without as much damage. But, you know, there are plenty of situations where you just need the range. One thing is that you can't free aim this spell. It will always go straight if you're not locked on. That's actually something that we thought of as like a decent limiter to the spell. So free aiming it would only work if you are directly in line with the target. So like if you're lined up perfectly already, then you might be able to free aim it. But even then, it's difficult to gauge. Your next spell, which is one of the late game spells as well, is called Incinerate, and it's another very long range spell. It's not as long range as Fell Missile, but it's very long range. It works a lot like Flame Whirl, except it shoots out a series of fireballs in a straight line toward the target. Spell is very satisfying to use. It does a lot of damage if you're connecting with most of them, and it's honestly pretty easy to connect with most of them, but because it is very slow, there are some situations where you really have to gauge whether using it's the best choice. Like there are other times where just simply throwing a fireball would be better. But the full charge version, the fireballs are bigger, and the damage is increased. Okay, and then we get to the biggest and baddest spell for this class, called Anger of the Fell God. So Anger of the Fell God conceptually took us a while to develop, but I will show you what it does. So basically what's going on is it's shooting a fireball up into the sky at a tremendous height, and then it will come back down and land on whatever you targeted. It has a huge AoE, absolutely massive area that it hits. It will also break some buildings down. So there it goes up into the sky. So this is sort of like you took Flame of the Fell God. You took that spell, or that precast where it's moving slowly forward. And we sort of took that times 100, where you could go Anger the Fell God, Flame of the Fell God, and then start shooting normal spells, and then they should all sort of connect around the same time, where they're getting exploded from the flame, they're getting then the anger's coming down, and then also your normal fireballs. Like, you can do tremendous bursts with this setup. And also you can shoot things at tremendous range. Like, if I was to just shoot this without being locked on, you can see how far it'll go. Way over there in the distance. You can actually snipe things if you're a good shot with it, which is pretty funny. Next, we have the legendary enchantment, which is Cyclopean Prophecy. Power to unleash the Fell God and anathema to the Erd Tree. Legendary enchantment. Kindle the Fell Flame within your body, increasing all fire damage you deal by 10%. Increasing total stamina and total FP by 25%. This effect also continuously deals fire damage to you and all enemies near you. So this is kind of where Fire's Deadly Sin sort of reintroduces itself. Like, there's a number of different things from the Dark Souls series that do stuff like this. But, like, cast it, I'm on fire, you can see that I'm taking some slight damage, but you're so effective just playing the game with this going, and anything near you is going to take damage as well. It's just very, very strong. And then you also have like so much increased resources when this is going as well. You can also stack it with Fire's Deadly Sin if you want more up-close damage. And of course, there's a number of things you can do in general that will, you know, give you some health regeneration. So now we'll talk about the weapons a little bit. There are 3 weapons that are, I would say, completely new. Really, there's 2, but then we also repurposed one to be new. So there used to be the Haligtree Knight's sword, which we've repurposed to be called the Fell Flame sword. And so it has the same moveset as that, including this R2 where you drop it down below. And then we went ahead and gave it Flaming Strike to make it a little bit more on theme. I'm thinking that this sword will probably get more work in the future, but for now it's sort of accomplishing the goal of fitting within that archetype. One of the reasons why is that this game has quite a few holy weapons, like a whole lot of them, and we just felt the number of them in terms of quantity was a little bit too high. We wanted to move this over to a different category. And then we have Sword of the Colossus. So this is the one you find just after Fire Giant. So it is a great sword with this moveset. And it looks pretty cool. And then here's the weapon art. Cyclopean Conflagration. In terms of model design, I think we're very proud of this one. It's got the eyeball there of the Cyclops, and yeah, it's super heated. It's a very fun weapon. It's a very good weapon, which is why you find it sort of so late in the game. And then the next one is the Axe of Fell Prophecy. So this has a normal axe moveset. Not a hand axe, but just normal axe. And then the weapon art is called Scorched Earth. It does this. This guy's blocking. There we go. So just so you can see the weapon art again. Really fun weapon. I really like this one. I think a lot of people, when they're playing this class, do end up going with this axe. I'd say it's definitely like it's a toss-up between the Fell Prophecy or the Cyclopean Sword. I like them both. I think the sword might be slightly more fun just because of the whole like fire laser attitude, like fire laser aspect. And then we have 2 armor sets currently for this class. One of them is the Fire Monk set, which is the hybrid set, because it increases all fire damage. So increases faith, reduces cost of incantations, and increases all fire damage. So definitely built to be the hybrid set. We do not have a pure caster set for this class yet. The other one is the Fire Prelate set, which is more just for melee. And then the correct seal is the giant seal, of course, and the damage boosting offhand is the smoldering shield, which has been changed to have buckler parry. So that's made it, I'd say, a whole tier better than it used to be. I mean, considering that it boosts giant flame incantations and also has buckler parry, it's just really, really, really good. I pretty much always want this. The other thing is that the requirements on this are moved basically from, like, to get the buckler and use the buckler, you need 13 dex. Whereas this only needs some strength and some faith and a little bit dex. So, like, if depending on where your stats have landed, then this can actually be an easier shield to parry with than the buckler. So, just a little tip for you there. Overall, I would say that this class is pretty well balanced. And what I mean by that is, I'm talking about in terms of their matchups, their encounters, which bosses they're good against, which bosses they're bad against. Fire Giant is obviously a boss that every single class has to fight. It's a required boss in order to beat the game. So in realizing that there's that, you have to sort of... The fact that this style of class does not have any sort of status effect damage, right? Like, it's not going to do bleed, it's not going to do frostbite, it's just going to do fire and then have like a little fire dot attached to that. Even still, the damage it can deal to Fire Giant is still pretty good. It's not a total slog if you sort of optimized yourself to fight that boss before getting there. But then after that, when you get to things like Skarda, Godfrey, Radabeast, that you are so good against the in-game bosses when you're doing fire damage. It's just so nice. It's really, you don't feel like you're struggling at all, whereas almost every holy build, in particular fundamentalist Golden Order, really struggles in the last fights. Whereas most of the other holy builds, they can kind of get around it because they might be doing statuses and whatever else. But yeah, so there's not too many fights that I would say are required that are automatically going to be resistant to fire. Right, so there's Fire Giant, and then, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it kind of feels like the only other, like, required fights are, I guess, Malekith and Morgott. And so, other than that, you can sort of maneuver your way through the game that you don't have to necessarily confront all the super fire-resistant guys. Now, you could choose to go fight Moog, which is going to be hard, right? Or you could choose to go fight Rykard, which is going to be hard, but you don't have to, right? But even still, if you were fighting those bosses, I still think you'd be fine with this class, just because the damage, the actual numerical value of so many of the damage output of the spells is so top-notch. And then also the weapons are kind of the same, right? They're just generally, like, the fact that you're doing fire damage and you don't have any statuses is not that big of a burden. I think other classes have bigger burdens. But, yeah, the play style, though, is very much like your progression of spells is also a progression of your spell's range. You start out without much range, and then as you progress your spells, you get more and more range, thereby giving you more and more options. So you're going to start out with this sort of... the progression is playstyle driven rather than being there's an overall theme sort of approaching to attaching itself to the class, right? Some classes, they never really get spells that are super long range because they're just one of their themes. This class is different. Its progression means range, and so the playstyle evolves as the toolkit evolves, which I think is kind of a fun thing. But I guess if they did have some overall themes, you would see things like burst damage, you would see things like big AoE, and not too much for single target, just like a few things here and there, but pretty much all of their spells are capable of hitting multiple things at once, if something is close enough together. So yeah, and that is the Fire Prophet. They are pretty straightforward, I'd say, amongst all the different classes. And a lot of people sort of actually avoid this class, I found out, because of their first catacombs they have to do, which is the Minor Erdtree catacombs in Caelid. Here's a fun tip. That dungeon is not so bad, at least the boss in that dungeon is not so bad, if you use crystal darts on the Watchdog duo. And we actually left a little 10 crystal darts sitting in that dungeon. That was one big change we made when we were redoing the Minor Erdtree catacombs, is that there is 10 crystal darts in there on the way to the boss. So for those who didn't know, who are struggling with the beginning of this class, pick up those crystal darts and throw 4 of them right in the beginning to toward one of the watchdogs and watch them fight, and it will not be that bad. So there you go. All right, so if you like this video and you want to see more like it, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with the next class breakdown, which will be... Ooh, what will it be? Let me check. Which will be Fundamentalist, right? So, yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with the breakdown of the Fundamentalist. Bye-bye.